Please welcome our next guest.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure, and I'm very happy to be able to speak in Kiev and to be in Ukraine. It's a great project that this conference is being held as a part of, and I hold my fingers crossed for all your endeavors in the area of translation, especially institutional translation. And I would like to talk to you about the quality aspect. I will cover 4 areas. First of all, we'll look into definitions, what actually institutional translation should be understood, should be seen to mean. I will also briefly show you what research has been carried out in this area. And I understood that it might be useful to actually share the Czech Republic's fate, the Czech Republic's experience in the area of translations, carrying out translation projects before Czech Republic's accession to the EU. So I have included this in my presentation too. And I would like to conclude with focusing specifically on translation manuals and style guides as a part of the quality mixture. So to go a bit into the definitions of institutional translation, I will refer to institutional translation in my slides as INTN, with this abbreviation. Typically, what we understand under institutional translation is twofold. Either we can see it in the wider sense or in the narrower sense. In the wider sense, we're talking about translating for an institution or obviously by translations done by an institution or within an institution. If we consider the area of institutional translation vis-à-vis the public service interpreting and translation domain or subfield, we could say the INTN, the institutional translation, involves also the public service interpreting and translation feature, obviously. So PSIT could be seen as a subfield of INTN in the wider sense. If we consider the legal translation studies, the LTS, I would say institutional translation is somewhere on the same level in terms of being a subfield or perhaps an interdiscipline within translation studies. So that's for the people interested, the people among you interested in translation studies and the reference framework here. Obviously, institutional translation in the wider sense concerns also institutions that are defined locally, temporarily, or in terms of their temporal definition and existence, and obviously institutions that have a formal standing, a formal framework. And we can distinguish various types of institutions, such as supranational, national, governmental, then commercial, obviously, in the wider sense, commercial institutions, and non-governmental as well. Institutional translation in the narrower sense is defined typically as having some specific feature. For example, an institution, the institutional translation subfield actually refers to the so-called translating institution. So translating institutions in this narrower sense typically have a language regime in place, have a hierarchy in terms of their management structure. Typically, the in-house staff and other contributors are bound by confidentiality. You have the sense of collectiveness. You engage revisers, experts, drafters. There is a loop, a cycle of collaboration between drafters and translators. And you have editors. Obviously, those participants work as a team, or this should be the case. So we talk of group authorship, group translation approach, and anonymity. If we talk about in-house teams, obviously you want to cater for the development of your staff. So typically the translating institutions offer also continued professional development involving mentoring training. So interestingly enough, this also is part of the definition of INTN. And when we come to the aspect of quality then, typically translations performed by a translating institution are standardized. So this means formalization of procedures, and this involves rules. CAT tools are a very good aspect or feature of this standardization. To define quality would take another or specific conference, obviously. Translation quality is a very complex thing. I will just refer to two major approaches to translation quality. One is concerned with the product. This means that you look at the product, you evaluate how well it has been translated, you look at the result, and the result is a result of the translation process. So we can evaluate or look at quality either from the product point of view or from the process point of view. Ideally, we should look at translation quality from both points of view because they obviously meet. There is this concept of translations being fit for purpose. This is adopted, this approach to translation quality is adopted by the DGT, for example, the Director General for Translations, and it's gaining ground all over in institutional translation. However, I would like to draw attention to some texts that actually point out that this is a managerial aspect, so very much understandable, but the translation product quality should not be left out from the picture as well. And when you read about translation quality, you often come across the abbreviation of QA, typically referring either to quality assurance or quality assessment, which are obviously two distinct things. Quality assurance is this whole process or whole structure of the ways to achieve translation product quality, and quality assessment is actually the way you check, you assess existing translations. So we should distinguish those two aspects. And I would now, in my presentation also, I would like to cover the aspect of translation manuals and translation style guides as a part of this translation quality mix, because they are a substantial feature. But let me just briefly scan some of the research so far on institutional translation, so for you to also actually have an idea of the fact that institutional translation as a subfield has been there for several years, for a lot of years, for some time. It's been studied as part of literary translation in the 70s already by the Slovak translation scholar Anton Popovič, 1975. He talks about institutions as part of the translation world, but in the sense of literary translation. Then we have one of the very first texts on INTN by Sylvie Léger, who actually was concerned with the situation at the United Nations. Kaisa Koskinen actually opened up this topic for research in 2000 as she co-authored, well, when she authored the text Institutional Illusions. That was actually the kick that inspired much of other subsequent studies. In 2001, very interesting text appeared in Terminologie et Traduction, which is a line published by then published by the European institutions. And this text concerns the translation of EC law in the Czech Republic. And remember, the Czech Republic joined the European Union in 2004. So this text actually appeared 3 years before Czech Republic's accession. And I would like to point out some things of exactly this text, because I think it's pertinent to your situation. Wagner, Beck, and Martinez, 2002, an iconic publication in the area of institutional translation. I think everybody knows the publication translating for the European Union institutions, very important, but it's been published before the Big Bang enlargement of 2004. Jan Mason, a great name in institutional translation, for me, very inspiring. Text parameters in translation, an expert in the field. Brian Mossop, equally a big name in institutional translation. When I was referring to the perhaps problematic aspect of fitness for purpose as a way to deal with translation quality, I would like to refer to Brian Mossop's 2006 text, where he describes his experiences from the Canadian government when he spent dozens of years at the government, and he talks about the shift from culture to business, and he actually says the fitness for purpose aspect has caused us translators to actually have to forget about the cultural aspect, about how the translations are nice, and to focus more on productivity. 2008, Koskinen's very inspiring translating institutions, cited very much. And in 2009, we have a specific entry in the Encyclopedia of Translation Studies called Institutional Translation. So INTN has been institutionalized in 2009 because it appeared in the encyclopedia. And you have Christina Schäffner's text, which deals with national. She actually compares national, supranational, and governmental organizations. Very interesting. And some publications of mine. I have done some research on institutional settings in the Czech Republic. I surveyed all the in-house translation teams in the Czech Republic in governmental settings, such as the ministries, which appeared 2016. And last year, my research on governmental institutions across Europe and the quality aspect of institutional translations as practiced across Europe, in several countries across Europe, has been published last year. And here's the highlight. This is a book which I have brought 5 copies of with me, and I am happy to share the book with you, to leave the printouts here with you, the copies. We published this book together with Lucia Biel from Warsaw University and with Krzysztof Loboda, also from Poland. And as you can see, the book is concerned with the quality aspect in institutional translation. And we are happy to have had very detailed and very well-informed contributions from colleagues from the European Commission, from the Court of Justice, and other very good placed experts to actually talk about the topics. So I very much recommend this publication to you. Apart from those 5 copies here, the book is published online. You will always be able to find it online if you put quality aspects in institutional translation, and we seem to have hit a very important nerve, because it has had more than 3,000 downloads since last year when it was published. So I call the book the QUIET book, because that's the abbreviation of quality aspects in institutional translation. It's not just some book, it's quite something, so that's why QUIET. So here's what we're covering, but I recommend you check out the link. And now perhaps to the situation in the Czech Republic. Yes, so the Czech Republic, as you know, 2004, the year of accession. Pavlína Obrová worked in a governmental department of the Czech government, which was concerned with translating and specifically also, perhaps much more, with revising translations prior to Czech Republic's accession. In 2001, they managed, together with Jiří Pelka, who is at the Council today, European Council in Brussels, they managed to actually summarize the practices of the Czech Republic's department and put it to paper in 2001. So something I recommend to you very much. It's not online, but however, it was published in 2 languages, mirroring, so Czech and English. So if you'd be interested, please drop me an email and I can send you the scan. To summarize this article, it says that in 1993, some 11 years before accession, the Accession Treaty was signed with the Czech Republic, which obliged the Czech Republic to ensure compatibility. I think something very well known for your situation. It included, this Accession Treaty included the promise of exchange of experts from the part of the European Commission, organizing seminars, training, and providing aid for translation of community legislation in the relevant sectors. The text speaks of a situation before 1998, which was the year of establishing a governmental department dealing with translation, and after 1998. So before 1998, the text says the translations were done ad hoc pretty much. Ministries did their own work. You had professional organizations, freelancers, agencies doing the work. Often those translations were made for internal use and hardly ever shared. And those translations often included serious flaws because the translators themselves were not always translators from profession. They were subject experts, area experts. They had expertise in the field, but not really translation skills. And terminology was never harmonized. 1998, that was the year. So remember, we're 6 years prior to accession. That was the turning point. The Koordinační a revizní centrum, abbreviated as KRC, was established. Originally was with the Ministry of Justice. The following year it moved to the cabinet office. What the KRC did actually was, first of all, to collect all the available translations so far and create a central database, a very wise, clever thing, I think. Second, they devised a methodology of how to treat translations, how to deal with the organizational and procedural aspect, such as revisions, and they included considerations on terminology, obviously. And thirdly, the KRC experts also were involved in public tenders when it was important to find outsourcing partners. The text was published in 2001, so just for your information, when they cover their current system of translating, they say, what we do is editing and revising or sometimes retranslating the existing translations. We do revision work very much. The KRC revisers also are getting familiar with European Commission. They were provided training in Brussels and Maastricht. And at that time of publishing, the team had 26 members of staff, 21 of which were revisers. So you can see that the bulk of work performed by the Kurtz expert was actually revising. And they finish with a description of their day-to-day business before they move to the quality aspect. And they say how it works. First of all, we give the translation order to the translation agency, meaning that the Kurtz had selected one translation provider, one single agency that actually did all the outsourced work for them. It was a huge contract. The agency sending semi-finished translations to departmental coordinator, meaning departmental at ministries. So you had in the loop ministry experts who would check the translations after the actual translation by the agency. Agency revises the changes of the experts and returns the translation to Kurtz with a list of approved terms, a very sophisticated procedure, but time-consuming. Revisers at the Kurtz assess acceptability and compatibility, and we're finishing by revised translations being sent to departmental coordinators at the ministries again in the loop to actually give terminological clearance at the very final stage, and final versions of the Czech target text uploaded to the database. So getting a final mark there. Now, when it comes to quality, the text concludes with two areas. First of all, it says we have developed a translation manual, and we did, we call it Rules for Translating EC Law, and we did so from the very outset. I think a great thing to do, to start all your work based on a manual that you can actually work with and improve along the way. They also call it an indispensable tool, which I readily understand. The genesis of the manual was based on an English EC translation manual. And they added some standardized formulations, standardized sentences in English, French, and German into the manual as a reference, and they made it available at the government website. As a second part of the quality assurance strategy, they deal with terminology, and they say they have from the very outset been devising and creating this database of mandatory terms. They made it accessible free of charge on the government website, and it was regularly updated. Okay, so this was on the reality in the Czech Republic. Let me conclude with a more general view of manuals and style guides as quality indicators. Again, you can see that the manuals and style guide issue has been with us in translation studies or in institutional translation studies from, let's say, 2004. You will see much of publications here. This is what typically is referred to when speaking of translation manuals and style guides, such as, for example, procedures, principles, glossaries, guidance, guides, guiding principles, group mind, institutional doctrines, institution instructions, manuals, norms, organized procedures, translators' handbooks, algorithms, codes of practice and customs, etc. So translation manuals and style guides is a very wide area of interest. And to show you what the DGT uses, which you know that the translation directorate of the European Commission is the largest translation team on the whole planet and in the known universe. And I think DGT's resource pages are really great for your information. And obviously, it's a huge resource. It's the most extensive and most complex translation resource ever compiled. I think I am ready to say that because I surveyed the resources, and I found out that it includes almost 800 links and resource files, web pages, etc. I did the research in 2017, and this is what the web page looks like. You might be familiar with the Translation and Drafting Resources web page of DGT. If you're not, then it's a must to have a look at it. Here you have the individual language sections, so to speak. And as a result of my research, I was able to find that there is very much variety among individual language departments in terms of how many resources they use. For example, Lithuanian and Swedish had 70 or more resources on their web page, DGT web page. However, you had Hungarian, Dutch and Polish websites with only 2 to 20 resources. So you can really tell there is much of a difference. This is what the structure of the individual language sites looks like. It has 3 main sections, and here is just an overview which I compiled using those 800 resources to show that some of the topics are well aligned, are well covered by all languages, all language department sites. Some are less so. So, for example, the names of institutions, you find it in all language versions, list of DGs, etc. So obviously there are chapters that are harmonized within those language-specific sites. But you have resources that just appear with 1, 2, or very few departments, such as guidelines for translating into a specific language, not very common, or translation quality info sheets for contractors. Sometimes you find these pieces of information hidden somewhere else. So it doesn't say, for example, Finnish would not have translation quality info sheets for contractors. You might just find it somewhere else. But it's not aligned in terms of structure. And here is the section concerning style guides, where you can see 2 aspects harmonized and the rest of it not so much. The 2 aspects are the interinstitutional style guide, obviously that's the utmost resource, and joint practical guide, also very, very important if you're both in-house and external translator. Okay, and to conclude, I found out that the DGT website resource page is uniform to some degree, but full uniformity has not been achieved yet. So, for example, Lithuanian has 4 times more items than the Netherlands or Polish departments. And it's not due to the year of accession, for example. So you could tell the longer the language department is there, the more resources they have compiled. It's not the case. So, for example, you have the similar number of resources for Czech, Croatian, Spanish, and German, which all those 4 languages joined the EU at different times during the EU existence. And I would also point out that there are some unique and non-unique sources, and this ratio also differs very much. You have links that specifically and explicitly refer to quality, but only just with 1% representation. So links that have the quality word in the surface text. Okay, that was pretty much of it from my side. Thank you for your attention, and the book that I refer to will be here for your, you can help yourselves. It's available in 5 printouts. Thank you very much.